In the spring of 1402, Timur marched again against the Ottomans. A new interchange of letters and embassies had taken place between him and Bayezid, which had only incensed still more each of these haughty conquerors against the other. But so professing the utmost scorn for his adversary, Timur knew well how formidable were Turkish arms, and they carefully drew together for this campaign the best appointed as well as the most numerous army that his vast dominions could supply. He practiced also the subtle policy of weakening his enemy by sowing discontent and treachery among Bayezid's troops. Timur's secret agents were sent to the Ottoman camp and urged on the numerous soldiers of Tartar race who served there that they ought not to fight against Timur, who was the true chief of all Tartar warriors, and that Bayezid was unworthy to command such brave men. The efforts of these spies and emissaries were greatly aided by the dissatisfaction which Bayezid's ill-judged parsimony and excessive severity in discipline had already created in his army. His best generals observed that bad spirit which was spreading among the men, and implored their sultan not to risk a decisive encounter with the superior forces of Timur, or at least occasion the goodwill of his soldiers by judicious liberality. Bayezid was both arrogant and avaricious. He determined to attack his enemy, but to keep back his treasures, reserving them, as one of his generals bitterly remarked, as certainly for Timur's use, as if the Turkish bullion was already stamped with Tartar coinage. Bayezid advanced with about 100,000 men against the far superior forces of Timur, which were posted near Sivas. The Mongol emperor did not immediately encounter the Ottomans, but maneuvered so as to ensure that the battle should take place on ground most advantageous for the action of cavalry, and one which he could avail himself most fully of his numerical superiority. By an able forced march through Kayseriya and Kırşehir, he evaded Bayezid and reached the city and plain of Angora. He immediately formed the siege of the city, knowing that Bayezid would not suffer the shame of letting so important a place fall without an effort to relieve it. As he expected, the Ottoman Sultan hurried to the rescue of Ankara, and Timur then took up an advantageous position on the broad plain of Çibukabat, to the northwest of the town. Notwithstanding the immense preponderance of numbers which he possessed, the Mongol sovereign observed all military precautions. One of his flanks was protected by the little river Çubukabat, which supplies Ankara with water. The other he had secured himself by a ditch and strong palisade. Bayezid, blinded by his former success, seemed to have lost all the generalship which he usually exhibited, and to have been seized at Ankara by the same spirit of rashness which possessed the Frankish chivalry whom he overthrew 5 years before at Nicopolis. He camped first to the north of Timur's position, and then, to show his contempt for his enemy, he marched his whole army away to the high ground in the neighborhood, and employed them in a grand hunting. The troops were drawn out, according to the Asiatic custom, in a vast circle, enclosing many miles, and they then moved in towards the center, so as to drive the game to where the Sultan and his officers were posted. Unfortunately, the districts in which Bayezid made this, his last chase, were destitute of water, and the sufferings of his troops, whom he thus devoted to the image of war, equalled those which an army ordinarily endures in vast stern reality. 5,000 of the Ottoman soldiers perished with thirst and fatigue to promote their Sultan's fatal sport. After this imperial folly, Bayezid marched back to his enemy, but he found that the camp which he had left was not occupied by the Tartars, and the only stream of water to which the Ottoman army could gain access had been turned and filled up by Timur's orders, so as to be almost unserviceable. Bayezid was thus obliged to seek a battle, nor would he have declined it even if he had the choice. Such was his pride and confidence in his power. On the Mongol army, on the 20th of July 1402, the decisive conflict took place. The Mongol army is said to have exceeded 800,000 men, and it certainly was far more numerous than that led by Bayezid, who could not have brought more than 100,000 into the field, and not only in numbers, but in equipment, in zeal, and in the skill with which they were directed. This superiority was only the side of the Mongols. Except The corps of Janissaries, who were under the Sultan's immediate orders, and the Servian auxiliaries, who fought gallantly for the Ottomans under their king Stefan Lazarevich. Bayezid's troops showed little prowess of soldiership at Ankara. The arts of Timur's emissaries had been effective, and when the action commenced, large numbers of the Tartars who were in Bayezid's service passed over the ranks of his enemies. The contingents of several of the Asiatic tributary princes took the same course, and it was only in the Ottoman center where Bayezid and his Janissaries stood, and in the left center where the Servians fought, that any effective resistance was made to the fierce and frequent charges of the Mongol cavalry. Bayezid saw that the day was irreparably lost, but he rejected the entreaties of his officers to fly while escape was yet practicable. He led his yet unbroken veterans to same rising ground, which he occupied with them, and there beat off all the attacks of the enemy throughout the day. But his brave Janissaries were sinking beneath thirst, fatigue, and wounds, and it was evident that the morning would see them a helpless prey to the myriad enemies who swarmed around them. At nightfall Bayezid attempted to escape from the field, but he was marked and pursued. His horse stumbled and fell with him, and Muhammad, the titular Khan of Yagatai, who served in Timur's army, had the glory of taking the great Sultan of the Ottomans prisoner. Of his 5 sons who had been in the battle, 3 had been more fortunate than their father. Prince Suleiman had escaped towards the Aegean Sea, Prince Mahmud to Amasya, and Prince Isa towards Karamania. Prince Musa was taken prisoner, and the 5th Prince Mustafa disappeared in the battle, nor was his fate ever certainly known. Bayezid was at first treated by Timur with respect and kindness, but in the ineffectual attempt to escape, incensed the conqueror, and increased the rigor of the Sultan's captivity. Thenceforth Bayezid was strictly watched by a numerous guard, and was placed in fetters every night. When the Mongol army moved from place to place, Timur took his captive with him. But in order to avoid the hateful sight of his enemies, Bayezid travelled in a covered litter with iron lattice work. The similarity of sound between 2 Turkish words caused the well-known story that the Tartar king carried their captive sultan about in an iron cage. The real ignominy which Bayezid underwent was sufficient to break a proud head, and he died in March 1403, 8 months after the Battle of Ankara. In Marlowe's play The Timurland, Beyazıt and the Turks, his wife, brained themselves against the bars of the cage on the stage. So he stoops to much bombast and extravagance. Marlowe breathes nobly the full spirit of ferocious energy and fiery pride of the great Oriental conquerors. His Timurland is immeasurably superior to benevolent Tamerlane of Rome, both as a dramatic character and as an image of historic truth. Timur had sufficient magnanimity to set at liberty Prince Musa, Bayezid's son, and to permit him to take the dead body to Bursa for honorable interment in the burial place of the Ottoman sovereigns. He himself did not long survive his fallen rival. He died at Otrar on the 1st of February 1405, while on his march to conquer China. In the brief interval between his victory at Ankara and his death, he had poured his desolating armies throughout the Ottoman dominions into Asia Minor, sacking the Turkish cities of Bursa, Nice, Kemlik, Akşehir, Karahisar, and many more, and then assailing the great city of Izmir, which had escaped the Ottoman power and had been for half a century held by the Christian Knights of St. John of Jerusalem. Timur directed the siege of Izmir in person. In 15 days, a mole had been thrown across the harbour, which deprived the besieged of all succor and brought the Mongol troops close to the seaward part of the city. Large portions of the landmark walls had been undermined. Huge movable towers had been constructed from which the besiegers boarded the city battlements, and Izmir was taken by storm. Notwithstanding the heroic defense of the Christian knights, Timur ordered a general massacre of the inhabitants without mercy of either age or sex. It was the custom of the Tartar conqueror to rear a vast pyramid of human heads when any great city had been captured by his troops. The garrison and population of Izmir proved insufficient and supplied materials for one of these monuments on his accustomed scale. He hides grandeur. But Timur was resolved not to leave the site of Izmir without his wonted trophy, and he ordered that the supply of heats should be economized by placing alternate layers on mud between the rows of heads in the pyramid. After utter similar acts of gigantic cruelty in Asia Minor, he marched into Georgia to punish the prince of that country for not having come in person when required to the Tartar camp. That unhappy Georgian perished by thousands for the imputed fault of their sovereign, and 700 towns and villages were destroyed by the troops of Timur. In 1404, the conqueror rested for a short time from bloodshedding and displayed his magnificence in his capital, the city of Samarkand, which he had not seen for 7 years. But the unslaked thirst of conquest and slaughter urged him onward to the attack of the Chinese Empire before the year was closed, and that wealthy and populous realm must have been swept by his destroying hordes had it not been saved by the favor which seized him at Otrar after his passage of the river Shion on the ice in February 1405. Timur died in that city at the age of 71, having reigned 36 years, during which he shed more blood and caused more misery than any other human being that ever was born upon the earth.